Nestled on the outskirts of a sprawling forest, where the canopy of towering trees cast shadows over a modest home, lived a poor yet brilliant scientist. He shared his humble abode with three others: his aging mother, who carried the weight of time with quiet dignity, and his devoted wife, whose eyes sparkled with boundless hope despite their meager circumstances. Their life was far from luxurious, but it was rich in love and shared dreams. The scientist was a man driven by an unrelenting curiosity about the universe. His workbench was cluttered with tools, wires, and stacks of notes filled with complex calculations and half-sketched blueprints. The centerpiece of his humble laboratory was an old, patched-up computer, a testament to his ingenuity and determination. It was with this worn machine that he chased a vision few would dare to dream, establishing contact with life beyond Earth. For weeks, the scientist toiled day and night, soldering circuits and coding intricate programs. His fingers moved with purpose, eyes flickering with the fire of ambition. Despite the financial struggles that gnawed at his household, the scientist's dedication never wavered. He knew that if he could just break through the veil of the unknown, it would change everything. His wife, though worried about the long hours he spent hunched over his work, supported him with silent understanding. She would often bring him warm meals, which grew cold and untouched as he buried himself deeper into his project. One evening, when the sky above the forest seemed to hold its breath and the crickets fell silent as if in anticipation, the impossible happened. A soft beep emanated from the computer, signaling an incoming signal that did not belong to this world. Heart pounding, the scientist adjusted the frequency, and a voice crackled through the speakers, a voice that spoke in a language that defied human comprehension yet resonated with a strange familiarity. His hands trembled as he responded, navigating through the haze of excitement and disbelief. The exchange between the scientist and the beings from beyond unfolded over the next few hours. They spoke with curiosity, sharing fragmented insights about their distant world. The scientist's initial shock gave way to elation. He had done it. He had connected with extraterrestrial life, a feat unmatched by any government or global institution. Yet, as their conversation deepened, it became clear that visiting their world was out of reach. He lacked the resources and support to even dream of such an expedition. A thought struck him then, bold and impulsive: if he couldn't go to them, why not invite them to come to him? Gathering his courage, he issued an invitation to these distant beings, expecting silence or dismissal. But to his astonishment, they accepted. They spoke of their fascination with Earth, agreeing to visit on a day they specified. Overwhelmed with joy, the scientist leaned back in his chair, eyes glistening as he glanced over to the old family photo on the wall, a silent testament to why he pursued this dream despite the odds. The next few days were filled with restless anticipation. The scientist pored over preparations, ensuring his equipment was in working order and rehearsing what he would say when they arrived. The thought of meeting beings from another world thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. He barely slept, consumed by the possibilities of this encounter and what it could mean for humankind, and for him, the man whom fate had chosen as the bridge between worlds. Then, on the morning of the fateful day, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the forest leaves, a new urgency swept over the household. The scientist's wife clutched her stomach, her face paling as pain coursed through her. Panic flashed in the scientist's eyes. Their child was arriving ahead of schedule. In an instant, anticipation turned into chaos. Abandoning his work, he helped his wife into their old, creaking car, and with his mother offering silent prayers in the back seat, they sped towards the nearest hospital. The forest seemed alive with whispers as if it, too, held its breath. Behind them, in their modest home, the computer still hummed with the soft whir of communication. The scientist did not know that the ship carrying his cosmic visitors was already slicing through the stratosphere, aiming for a landing near his small house. Tragedy struck swiftly and without mercy. As they raced down the narrow road, a sharp turn and a slick patch sent their car skidding off course. The crash shattered the stillness, leaving twisted metal and broken dreams in its wake. The scientist died instantly, his aspirations extinguished in a moment. His wife, battered and bleeding, clung to life just long enough to deliver their baby before she, too, succumbed to her injuries. The newborn, small and fragile, survived, his first cries mingling with the soft hum of distant, approaching visitors who had no idea that their host had just been lost to the cruel hand of fate. And so, Under the shadow of grief and the echoes of distant stars, the stage was set for a story that was far from over. The sun rose hesitantly over the forest, casting long shadows over the tragedy that had unfolded just hours before. The forest, usually alive with the chattering of birds and rustling leaves, felt muted as if mourning the loss of the man whose genius had drawn visitors from across the cosmos. Unseen by any human eye, a sleek, metallic ship hovered silently at the edge of the woods, its surface glistening like liquid silver under the early morning light. From it emerged beings whose shapes defied earthly norms, tall, slender, with elongated limbs and luminous eyes that mirrored the stars they had traversed to arrive. The aliens moved with purpose, their movements fluid and almost dance-like as they explored their unfamiliar surroundings. They were not hostile but curious, absorbing the dense green landscape and the quiet hum of life that pulsed through it. One among them, smaller and more inquisitive, noticed the tiny home just beyond the tree line. His keen senses detected the echo of a transmission, the remnants of the signal that had summoned them from their distant world. But before they could venture further, a sudden alert crackled through their communication system, a warning of imminent danger. The air grew tense as the visitors exchanged quick, urgent glances. The forest seemed to darken, an unseen threat pressing against them. Without hesitation, they sprinted back toward their ship, a glimmering beacon amidst the shadowy trees. Feet pounded the earth, the leaves crackled, and the smallest of them lagged behind, curiosity still tugging at him as he glanced back at the little house where it all began. The moment he paused was enough to seal his fate. The ship's doors closed, and with a whisper-like hum, it lifted off the ground, shimmering as it ascended into the sky and disappeared into the vast blue. The stranded alien watched in silent disbelief as his only way home vanished, leaving him behind in an unfamiliar and potentially hostile world. As the sun climbed higher, the alien's luminescent eyes, filled with fear and determination, scanned the forest. He knew he could not stay exposed. Moving with agile, deliberate steps, he found refuge in the thick underbrush, where he could blend into the play of light and shadow. For days, he adapted, learning the sounds and scents of this strange new world. Yet, he was lonely, haunted by the image of his ship disappearing above the trees and the faces of his comrades. Meanwhile, life carried on in the small town not far from the forest's edge. The baby born amid tragedy was taken in by his grandmother, who named him Aeon, a beacon of hope amid their grief. Aeon grew up with whispers surrounding his past. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the accident, how his parents' death was both a cruel twist of fate and a mystery. Yet, the story of the alien's brief appearance was buried under disbelief and forgotten tales, just another strange rumor that few took seriously. Aeon's childhood was marked by challenges. The accident had left invisible scars. His mind developed slower than those of his peers, making school a battlefield where he struggled daily. He was a gentle soul, often lost in thought and shadowed by an awareness that he was different. Teachers expressed their doubts about his learning abilities, and his classmates' taunts grew sharper as he aged without progressing. Despite his grandmother's unyielding belief in him, Aeon felt trapped, a prisoner of his limitations and the pity that surrounded him. On rare occasions, when the nights were particularly quiet and the moon cast its pale glow over the forest, a strange, watchful presence stirred among the trees. The alien, who had adapted and survived in hiding, found himself inexplicably drawn to the little house that now sheltered Aeon. He watched as the boy struggled through his days, a silent observer filled with a strange, unspoken bond to the child whose father had unknowingly changed the course of his fate. Years rolled by, and Aeon reached his 20th birthday. His body matured, but his mind remained that of a child. The humiliation of being a grown man in the 4th grade gnawed at him, making him lash out in frustration. One evening, in a moment of bitter rage, he stormed into the room that had once been his father's workshop. Dust motes danced in the air as Aeon's eyes fell on the old computer, now a relic of a past that seemed almost mythical. Unable to contain his anger, he reached out to swipe it off the table but paused, fingers hovering over the keys that had once clicked under his father's hands. Driven by impulse, he tapped a few random keys, and suddenly, a soft hum filled the room. It was a sound that stirred memories in the forest, a signal that traveled the still night air like a whisper. The alien, hiding in the underbrush, stiffened. His eyes, wide with recognition, shone brighter as he rose and moved silently towards the source of the call, the boy who unknowingly beckoned him. For the first time in years, hope flickered in both Aeon's heart and in the eyes of the being who had once crossed the stars to reach Earth. The old house stood in the deep silence of the night, its weathered walls holding stories long forgotten. Inside, the dim glow of the old computer cast shadows that flickered like ghosts of the past. Aeon's chest heaved as he glared at the machine, its sudden activation both unnerving and oddly familiar. The soft, rhythmic hum it emitted was unlike anything he had heard before, but it resonated deep within him, as if waking something long dormant. Unbeknownst to Aeon, just beyond the safety of the house, a pair of glowing eyes watched with intensity. The alien, who had lived hidden among the trees for almost 2 decades, felt a surge of recognition. That sound, the one he had heard all those years ago when he had been stranded, was now echoing once more. Compelled by an urgency he could not ignore, the alien crept closer to the house, careful not to make a sound. His movements were swift and silent, blending seamlessly with the night. Inside, Aeon's frustration flared. His life felt like a series of broken pieces. Impossible to assemble. School had been another disaster that day, classmates mocked him, and teachers pity-cut him deeper than any insult. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing a small jar of nuts and bolts to rattle and spill. In that chaotic moment, something strange happened. The computer screen shifted from a steady hum to displaying symbols that glowed a bright, alien blue. The characters moved and reconfigured themselves, as if responding to Aeon's touch. He stared, entranced, his anger forgotten as curiosity took hold. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath, and the alien edged even closer, peering through the window with eyes that reflected both fear and hope. Inside, Aeon, emboldened by the strange reaction of the computer, tapped more keys. Each keystroke sent a pulse through the room, and to his astonishment, the symbols formed coherent patterns. It was a language he couldn't read but felt as if he had known all along. Suddenly, a soft knock on the window startled him. The sound shattered the fragile barrier between reality and the surreal. Aeon whipped around, his wide eyes locking onto the figure outside. His mind scrambled to process what he was seeing. A tall, slender being with skin that shimmered faintly in the moonlight, eyes that glowed like twin orbs of distant stars. Fear froze him in place, but a strange familiarity, a recognition he could not explain, tugged at him. The alien raised a hand slowly, palm open, in a gesture that spoke not of threat but of peace. Aeon's pulse thundered in his ears, and every instinct told him to run, to scream for help. But something deep within whispered for him to stay. The being outside the window took a cautious step back, giving Aeon space to make the first move. It was then that he noticed the faint scars crisscrossing the alien's arms and the way its eyes, filled with an indescribable sadness, mirrored his own loneliness. Summoning courage he didn't know he possessed, Aeon reached out and unlatched the window. The wooden frame groaned as he pushed it open, and the crisp night air swept into the room, carrying with it the earthy scent of the forest. The alien hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside, moving with an elegance that seemed almost liquid. They stood face to face, neither moving nor speaking. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions and shared wonder. Finally, the alien extended a slender finger and gently touched Aeon's temple. A rush of energy coursed through him, like a river breaking through a dam. His vision blurred, and a bright light erupted behind his eyes, flooding him with warmth. When the light faded, he fell to his knees, gasping. Aeon looked up, and the world appeared sharper than before. The room was bathed in a clarity that made everything seem more vibrant, more alive. He blinked and realized that he could see perfectly. For years, he had been reliant on thick glasses to navigate his blurry reality. He reached for them, only to realize they were no longer on his face. They lay shattered on the floor, forgotten. The alien watched him with eyes that now seemed more relieved than sad. In that moment, Aeon understood that this being, this mysterious visitor, had given him more than just physical sight. It had awakened something inside him, a potential he never knew he had. A silent understanding passed between them. The being had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the boy whose father had called out to the stars and bridged the gap between worlds. Aeon stood, steadier than he ever had before, as a newfound strength coursed through him. Questions burned in his mind, but before he could voice them, his grandmother's footsteps echoed from down the hallway. The alien tensed, eyes Darting toward the window, Aeon shook his head subtly, signaling for it to stay hidden. As his grandmother's worried voice called out his name, the boy felt, for the first time in years, that he was no longer alone, and that his story was only just beginning. The sun rose over the quiet town, casting golden light that filtered through the leaves of the forest. Aeon sat at the edge of his bed, replaying the night's events over and over in his mind. He touched his face, still awestruck by the sharpness of his vision and the energy that pulsed through him. The room, which once seemed gloomy and cluttered, now looked vibrant. The cracked wallpaper, the old books, even the scratches on the wooden floor felt more alive, as if each told a story he had missed before. Yet, the biggest change wasn't in what he saw, it was in what he felt, powerful, awakened, and curious. Aeon's grandmother noticed the change almost immediately when she entered his room to call him for breakfast. Her sharp eyes, which had always been clouded with concern, now held surprise. "Aeon, what happened here?" she whispered, eyes darting around the room that seemed somehow transformed. But it wasn't the room that captured her attention, it was Aeon. He stood taller, his shoulders squared, and there was a spark in his gaze that she hadn't seen before. "Nothing, Daddy," Aeon replied, the tremor in his voice barely controlled. He was still struggling to come to terms with what had happened. The alien, now hidden somewhere in the forest, had changed him. It was more than just the restoration of his vision, it was an unexplainable surge of vitality. His grandmother tilted her head, sensing that something was different, but chose not to press him further. She sighed, brushing a stray strand of hair from his face, and left the room. As the day passed, Aeon struggled to act normally, but the newfound power within him was hard to contain. At school, whispers followed him like shadows. The same boy who had always struggled to read basic sentences was now breezing through complicated questions. Teachers exchanged puzzled glances, and classmates eyed him with both suspicion and awe. In math class, he solved problems that others struggled to comprehend, and in physical education, he moved with agility that surprised even himself. But with each accomplishment came the same lingering thought: what had the alien really done to him? Meanwhile, deep in the forest, the alien watched from a distance, blending seamlessly into the shadows. It had survived for years by studying the creatures of Earth, but this boy, this human, intrigued him more than any other. The alien had waited long for this moment, sensing that Aeon was connected to the man who had summoned them years ago, the man who had given the universe a voice on Earth. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the town, Aeon returned home, exhaustion in his limbs but exhilaration in his heart. He went straight to his father's old workshop, the place where the computer hummed with life and where so many secrets remained hidden. His hands shook as he traced the edges of the machine, searching for answers. Then, without warning, a familiar sound reached his ears, the faint rustling of leaves outside. Aeon turned sharply to see the alien, its eyes glistening in the dim light. Unlike the night before, this time it stood a bit closer, the lines of its face relaxed but intense. Aeon felt his heartbeat quicken but forced himself to stay composed. "What are you?" he whispered, half afraid of the answer. The alien tilted its head slightly, the light reflecting off its smooth, shimmering skin. It raised a hand and pressed it against the glass of the window, fingertips glowing. Softly, in an instant, images flooded Aeon's mind, snippets of the past, flashes of his father working late into the night, the first transmission sent out to the stars, and the alien ship descending through the clouds. He saw his father's excitement and the bittersweet moment when he invited them to visit Earth, unaware of the tragedy that would follow. Aeon gasped, stepping back as the images subsided. His father hadn't just been a man obsessed with science, he had been a pioneer, reaching out beyond the known world. And now, standing in front of Aeon was the living proof of that dream, a dream interrupted by fate but perhaps not yet finished. The alien's eyes softened, and it made a gesture as if to speak. Though no words came, Aeon understood. The creature was not here to harm but to seek help, perhaps even redemption. Before Aeon could react further, a noise echoed from the forest's edge, the low rumble of a vehicle and the sound of footsteps approaching the house. His heart clenched. The police, still suspicious after years of rumors, had come closer than ever to uncovering the hidden truth. Panic surged in Aeon as he looked from the window to the alien. There wasn't much time. Without thinking, he motioned for the alien to hide and bolted to the front door to stall whoever approached. The alien melted back into the forest, its silhouette barely visible in the gathering darkness. As Aeon opened the door, he came face to face with the stern eyes of the local police chief. "We need to ask you some questions," the officer said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Aeon glanced back over his shoulder, where the old computer blinked steadily, a silent witness to the secrets he now held. The heavy silence in the room was broken only by the faint hum of the computer. Aeon's mind raced, his heart pounding so loudly he feared the officer standing before him could hear it. The police chief, a man with a weathered face and eyes as sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room with suspicion. Rumors of strange occurrences near Aeon's home had finally reached a breaking point. This was no longer just idle town gossip, it was an investigation. "Is everything all right, son?" the officer asked, his tone a mix of concern and authority. Aeon forced himself to nod, fighting the urge to glance toward the window where the alien had slipped into the cover of darkness. He could still feel the presence of its luminous eyes watching from the trees, waiting, perhaps even trusting him to protect their secret. "Yes, everything's fine," Aeon managed, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. The officer's gaze swept over the room one more time before a faint radio call crackled from his belt. With a final nod, he turned away, leaving Aeon standing at the threshold, relief washing over him in a cold wave as the sound of police vehicles faded into the distance. When the night fell into a deeper silence, Aeon knew he needed to act quickly. He darted out into the woods, the cool air biting at his skin. There, hidden among the twisted branches, the alien emerged from the shadows. They stood facing each other, and for the first time, Aeon spoke with conviction. "They'll come back. We need to get you home," he said, his voice strong, even as doubt lingered in the back of his mind. How would a boy with no resources help an alien return to the stars? The answer, as it always seemed, lay in the relics of his father's work. The old computer, its capabilities far beyond what he had ever understood, would be their beacon. Back inside the house, Aeon worked feverishly, fingers flying over keys as the alien stood beside him, its presence a calm amidst the storm. Blue symbols filled the screen, forming a language that, impossibly, Aeon began to comprehend. The machine hummed louder, pulses of light flowing like waves across its surface, signaling a connection being forged. Days passed in a blur of preparation. Aeon, with the alien's guidance, modified old blueprints and rigged contraptions that once belonged to his father. The alien watched with something that resembled pride, its eyes reflecting the glow of the screen, as Aeon tapped into knowledge he didn't know he had. But time was not their ally. The town had grown restless, whispers morphing into tangible fear. Patrols were frequent, officers questioning anyone who lived near the forest. The day finally arrived when Aeon received a signal, confirmation that a rescue ship would soon come. The alien's expression, usually so guarded, softened with something akin to hope. The night before the ship's arrival, the sound of engines disrupted the quiet once more. Flashlights cut through the darkness like searchlights as officers approached the house. Aeon's grandmother, who had sensed for days that something was amiss, stood by her grandson's side, gripping his arm tightly. "Daddy, I have to do this," Aeon whispered, looking into her eyes that held both fear and unwavering love. She nodded, releasing him with a shaky breath. The bond between them spoke louder than words. She knew that the destiny unfolding was one Aeon was meant to face. The door burst open just as Aeon and the alien dashed out the back. Shouts erupted, and beams of light swept wildly through the trees. Aeon pushed himself forward, every muscle straining as they raced toward the clearing where the rescue ship would appear. The alien stumbled but Aeon caught it, determination burning in his eyes. Suddenly, a sharp pain tore through his side, a bullet. He gasped but didn't stop, his vision blurring as the shouts of officers grew more distant. Adrenaline fueled him as they reached the clearing. The ship descended in a blaze of silver and light, its hum deafening as it touched the forest floor. The hatch opened, and the alien turned to Aeon, eyes wet with emotion. It hesitated, then embraced him tightly, their connection wordless but profound. "Go," Aeon choked out, collapsing to his knees. The alien climbed into the ship, but before it disappeared, it looked back one last time. A thin beam of light shot from its hand, enveloping Aeon in warmth. The pain in his side dulled, replaced by an energy that seeped into his bones. The hatch closed, and the ship lifted, disappearing into the stars as the sound of approaching officers closed in. Aeon struggled to his feet just as the police burst into the clearing, weapons drawn. They stared at the empty space, bewildered. He stood tall, eyes bright with the remnants of the alien's gift, and raised his hands in surrender. In the days that followed, Aeon's tale became legend. His trial was public, and when he recounted the truth, the story of a boy, an alien, and an unfulfilled promise, gasps filled the room. The judge's gavel fell, and silence followed. Then, applause erupted as the weight of what Aeon had done sunk in. He had saved a life, defied the odds, and honored his father's legacy. Aeon left the courtroom that day not as the boy who once failed every class, but as a hero whose destiny had reached beyond the stars.